If you had stumbled upon a popular horror forum back in 2010, you would have most likely found a post detailing the rules to a game on the first page. It would later get deleted within a single day, and the author of the account that posted it would be completely unreachable. Some people who visited that post decided to save a copy of it to refer to later, only realizing how valuable their original copies were now that the post was completely off the internet. Instead of reposting the rules on the online web for everyone to see, the individuals who kept those copies played the very game and realized it was far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Except, some weren't even able to make it back. One anonymous individual would later survive the game and decide to post it on a dark web forum before promptly deleting his account and disappearing. I'm talking about the Subway game. The Subway game is an extremely dangerous game with the chances of failure exponentially higher than the chances of success. Winning the game requires deep determination, grit, and willpower, as well as some obvious physical strengths too. Participating in this game if you are sick, a poor athlete, or emotionally vulnerable almost certainly leads to failing the game. Winning the game will provide the player with a great reward, a choice to make one wish that will come true. The game specifically requires the player to write the wish in mind on a piece of paper and take it with them before attempting the game. Failing the game, however, will lead to the death of the player, but that won't be the end of it. The player will die the most painful and gruesome death a person will ever suffer, and then once they have died, their soul will continue to be tortured in the same location for all of eternity by the powers of the game. You can tell I've looked into this game and acknowledged its dangers, so you may wonder, why am I writing this down? I got diagnosed with lung cancer 6 days ago. The doctor gave me 6 months to live, and since then, I've fallen into deep depression. My family has tried to make me enjoy the rest of my life, but I can't accept such a short life. I still have things to experience and want to live a longer, fuller life. This is what led me to the game in the first place. And when I first found the instructions to the game while looking for similar dodgy cancer cures on the dark web, I found this game. As skeptical as I was of its authenticity, I decided to go through with the ritual regardless, because I was desperate. I needed something to work, and I would go to all lengths to extend my life. To initiate the ritual, one must go to a remote subway station with no people around at around 1 a.m. at night. While the time isn't necessarily set, it's important that the time is between 1 and 2 a.m. and that not a single other person is around. Otherwise, the ritual won't work. I located a remote subway station that was out of service and scheduled to be closed soon. It was the first place to initiate the ritual, and so I drove there in the dead of night. As I stared at the dim passing streetlights on the road, I felt strong urges to return and give up on the ritual, but I pushed through. To perform the ritual correctly, the player must bring with themselves the sheet of paper with their wish written on it, as mentioned previously, and a wristwatch, preferably made of silver. The silver assists in keeping rogue entities away, and the watch itself is imperative to tracking time in the ritual, one of the main mechanics of the game. I brought both of these items with me, with my wish obviously being the curing of my lung cancer. I walked down the stairs into the underground subway station and started to walk around the 2 platforms. This was the part of the game that initiated it. Pacing around in the subway station for exactly 33 minutes will automatically start the game. The instructions stated the importance of considering the dangers of playing the game in those 33 minutes. There is still a chance to escape the game within those 33 minutes by exiting the station and promptly returning home. After that time is up, the game has started, and attempting to exit the subway station without going through with the game first will lead to instant failure. I stared around the dimly lit platform at the dusty wooden benches as I considered turning back and going home. I pushed through regardless, knowing that my will to live a longer life was stronger than my fear of the game. Dying now and dying in 6 months would make no difference. I had nothing to lose playing this game when I was already sentenced to death. The lights began to flicker and dim further until the basic silhouettes of the objects on the platform were visible. My body started to freeze up as my flight or fight response was activated, and I suddenly grew very sensitive to the dull thud of my shoes against the dirty concrete floor and the light whistling of the wind outside. I looked down at my watch and squinted to read the time. The dark made it difficult to discern the position of the watch hands. I didn't need to check the time though, because a few seconds later, I felt a strong sense of being watched. It came from deep in my gut and caused my stomach to tie in several knots. I turned around and saw the faint outline of a dark figure behind me. At the same time, the lights brightened slightly, and I could finally see the details of the objects around me. The person in front of me was facing away from me, and were wearing a typical security guard uniform, with dark pressed pants and a matching coat. My heart began to thud rapidly against my ribcage as I realized the game had started. The appearance of the security guard is a clear indication of the game starting. Once spotted, the player must try their very best to slowly walk back and away from the security guard. The rest of the game will involve hiding from the security guard, while also not leaving the train station until sunrise. I began to very carefully back away from the security guard when I heard him start whispering. Every raspy whisper sent a chill down my spine as I strained my ears to listen to what the guard was saying. I found myself frozen on the spot, struggling to make out what the guard was saying. The whispering continued as the guard began to turn around slowly. I lurched backwards as I realized the guard was about to see me, and quickly jumped behind a pillar as the guard turned around completely. I moved too quickly to be able to make out the guard's face, and all I saw was a blur of white, red and black like a damaged watercolor painting. I had nearly failed the game within the first 5 minutes. While staying away from the security guard, the player must also complete 3 tasks to end the game and have their wish granted. The failure of completing these tasks before leaving will lead to the security guard permanently following the player and killing them. The first task is simple. A train will stop at this station within 15 minutes of the start of the game. The player must board this train and avoid any interaction with the passengers, no matter what. If the train does not appear, the player has failed the game. I watched the minute hand on my watch move slowly as I stood behind the pillar and listened to the slow and deliberate steps of the security guard. He had stopped whispering to himself and begun walking around the platform. As the minutes passed and the train didn't appear, I began to worry. I heard the steady rumble of a train on the tracks just before 15 minutes had passed. I slowly peeked from behind the pillar and noticed that the security guard boarded the train, with his back still turned to me. The train itself was a typical modern train with nothing out of the ordinary. I walked over to the train and boarded it just before the doors closed. The security guard could still chase me on the train, and so I had to constantly move around making sure that he didn't find me as he searched through the entire train. The rules stated that the train ride would be no longer than 10 minutes, with the train stopping at the same subway station at the end of the ride. As the player continues to pass through carriages to avoid the security guard, they would notice that the carriages are endless. The goal is to keep moving through carriages and not stopping to rest, even if the player is confident that the security guard is multiple carriages behind, because they can be caught off guard at any moment. The train was packed to the brim. Almost every seat was occupied with people of all ages and genders, and it pretty much seemed like a normal busy morning train. I began to walk from carriage to carriage, ignoring everyone and not making any eye contact. As I was passing through my fifth carriage, I accidentally tripped on a baby's stroller wheel in the middle of the carriage and nearly fell on the baby itself. The mother of the child reacted quickly and locked eyes with me. I instinctively began to apologize, and as soon as the first syllable came out of my mouth, the entire cabin of people fell silent and locked their eyes on me. The warm, bustling environment of the carriage was reduced to a cold, silent stare. I quickly removed my watch and threw it far away behind me as everyone in the carriage simultaneously jumped towards it. Taking this as my cue, I quickly ran as fast as I could through the carriages, making sure that I didn't react with anyone this time. The train began to slow and pulled to a stop at the same subway. I quickly departed the train and hid behind the same pillar just as the security guard got off the train as well, with his back still turned to me. My mistake on the train had cost me my silver watch, and without it, winning the game was going to be much more difficult. The instructions on the game state that when the player gets off the train, they will find themselves on the same station. While they will geographically be on the same station, they've actually moved to another dimension. The rest of the game will occur in this strange new world of entities that humans were never meant to interact with. Leaving the train station here almost certainly means a death from the entities outside. The subway station itself acts as a midway medium between the normal world and this world, forming an ideal location to proceed with the rest of the ritual. The second task involves finding a door. This hypothetical door will lead to stairs that ascend into a new area, the place where the final task will be performed. All the while, the player must avoid the night guard and anything else on the subway. While the task seems incredibly easy, many people who have won the game claim it was the hardest part. I watched the night guard continue to pace around the station, with his back always turned to me. My blood ran cold when a disturbing thought that sent chills down my spine formed in my mind. The only feasible way for the night guard to consistently keep his back turned to me would involve him knowing where I was and where I was facing to begin with. I felt my stomach sink to the floor as I continued to watch the night guard, who not once turned to face me. He was just playing with me. I needed to find that door, fast. As the security guard began to walk past the pillar, I slowly walked around and began to scan the dimly lit platform with my eyes. I couldn't see any door yet, and so I slowly crawled forward on the platform, ducking behind a bench occasionally as I heard the security guard get closer. I got around the whole platform using this strategy of ducking behind benches and objects every time I felt the security guard coming closer. But as I scanned the whole platform, I realized that I couldn't find a single door. A familiar voice sliced through the air. It was my mother's voice, and she was yelling at me to call back. She seemed worried from the sound of her voice. "Come back, Ethan." I was about to yell back when I realized that it would be impossible for my mother to be here. She had died 2 years ago. Just as I was processing this, I began to hear the sound of police sirens and a man yelling at me to come out. More voices melted into the chorus, and soon, the subway was an echoing cacophony of familiar and unfamiliar voices, all singing the same chorus. Whatever was outside was trying to break me and make me come outside the subway station. I continued to look around the platform for my exit ticket, the door. I was crouched behind a bench when I realized that I had lost track of where the security guard was as I was listening to these voices. That's when I felt a cold, hard grip on my ankle. I whipped my head around and saw the security guard, still with his back turned to me, grabbing me with his arm, bent in an impossible way. My shrill scream echoed across the entire subway station as I jumped back. The grip on my leg loosened and I was able to kick away and quickly get on my feet before the security guard began to walk backwards toward me at an impossible speed. I continued to run, knowing that I had failed the game. I couldn't run forever, and soon enough, the night guard or something else lurking in the shadows will grab me. Just then, a thick black tendril curled out from under the platform and grabbed my ankle. It pulled me onto the tracks like I was a rag doll. As I inevitably slipped and fell face first on the hard concrete platform, my vision began to narrow and I saw pinpricks of light in my vision. My head felt like it was underwater, and my thoughts began to mush together until they all felt like they were lost in fog. The excruciating pain of my entire body being battered against the rough rocks on the tracks somehow brought me back to my senses. My eyes were blurry with tears, and my entire body stung from newly formed bruises, cuts, and grazes. The tendril continued to pull me in towards a dark black mass from beneath the platform. It was somehow darker than the darkness under the platform itself, and its grip on me was firm. I grabbed a rock from the tracks and smashed it on the tendril. It unwrapped from my leg just as I brought the rock down on it, and I accidentally hit my own ankle instead. Every single nerve in my ankle burned with excruciating pain the moment the rock slammed against it, and the dull crack that permeated the air made it obvious that I had possibly fractured a bone. Just then, the night guard also jumped down on the tracks as the tendril prepared to grab my now hurt ankle again. I began to crawl away helplessly. The rough rocks cut my palms as I pushed against them to move my body forward and away from the entities that longed for my soul. Just then, I felt cold metal against my palms. I looked down and noticed that hidden beneath the rocks was what looked to be a metal trapdoor. I desperately searched for the handle, and once I found it, I opened the heavy rusted door with my remaining strength. As I pushed my whole body into the opening, I realized that there was a drop. I tumbled down for a short moment before I landed on my hurt ankle and twisted it. The pain nearly blinded me as I curled into a fetal position in agony. I looked around and noticed I was in a well-lit room with a single small table in the middle. The final task. Crawling over to the table caused bursts of pain to go through every single nerve in my body. My muscles burned and ached, and I was on the verge of passing out. I quickly placed the sheet of paper with my wish on the table, just as my vision went black. They found me bruised and battered on the tracks just outside the entrance of the subway station in the morning. It took my ankle another month to be usable again, and I still walk with a limp today. However, the game wasn't a lie, and my wish was indeed granted. It's just that the other day I saw the security guard outside my window at night, still with his back turned to me. If you do choose to play the subway game, take my story as a warning. As I type this out and hit post, I've realized one thing. You don't ever truly win the game. I thought I'd hit the jackpot when I landed a job as a teacher of adults. No more helicopter parents, busybody administrators, or cringy TikTok trends. I'd be working with people who wanted to improve their lives and get a fresh start. The only catch was that I'd be working in a civic center, not an ordinary school, and the classes would be in the evening. As he showed me my new classroom, the hiring agent for this new program explained that I'd be the last person to leave the building. Turning off the lights and locking up would be my responsibility. At the time, That seemed like a fair price to pay for the work I'd be doing. I took a look around at the yellow-tiled floor, bare brick walls, and dusty fluorescent lights. It needed work, but it felt like a place I could call my own. The first thing I did was to erase the whiteboard. Written across it in huge, childish letters, I read, "I don't want to be alone in the dark anymore." Some sort of prank, I figured, or maybe a leftover from an old lesson. I smirked, erased it, and didn't give the message much attention. I spent the next week scrambling for materials, setting up my classroom, and troubleshooting the Civic Center's outdated technology. I barely had time to look around me, much less notice the eerie solitude of the Civic Center's dark hallways. But when my first students came in the door, the knot of nervousness that had built up in my stomach finally unwound, and I remembered why I'd taken this job in the first place. The adults in my class were of all ages and backgrounds, but they were all working towards a change. It was meaningful work with interesting people, even better than I'd hoped for. The only thing I didn't like about the job was staying late at the Civic Center. It was a large building and my classroom was on the 5th floor. The blackness outside the windows only emphasized the empty loneliness of the night. You hear even the slightest sounds under conditions like that, and in time, you find yourself wondering what might be making them. I was putting up posters the first time it happened. My students had all gone, and the only light in the entire center spilled out into the corridor from my classroom. There was no reason for anyone else to be in the building. And yet, I heard footsteps. Climbing down from the desk, I stuck my head out into the hallway. Seeing no one, I chalked it up to overwork, but I found myself looking over my shoulder while I left that night. A few evenings later, it was back. The unmistakable echo of something walking down the corridor. It was heavier somehow, like the source of the noise was larger and closer than before. This time, I knew I wasn't dreaming. With my keys clenched tightly in my fist, I decided I was going to find this intruder. I went room by room, turning on lights as I searched storage closets, archives, meeting rooms, offices, and craft workshops. Whoever came in must have found that everyone was gone and left, I rationalized. But then, why hadn't I heard any sound from the elevators? I started leaving with the students after that, turning out the lights behind us as I hustled everyone out of the door. It wasn't always possible though, and I began dreading the days when I knew I'd be up there by myself. Our minds have an amazing ability to hide from themselves that which they don't dare to see or can't explain. I told myself that it wasn't footsteps, only some late-night machinery activating. When I began to hear other sounds too, like someone crawling in the empty space between the ceiling tiles and the roof, I told myself that it was rats, or pipes, anything to avoid facing the truth that was scurrying above my head. Instead, I locked my classroom door and bolted for the exit as soon as the noises started. Although later I couldn't explain why my heart was pounding and my shirt soaked through with sweat. As if to challenge my skepticism, the occurrences on the 5th floor became stranger and stranger. Lights, radios, and appliances turned off and on without warning. More than once I found myself running like a panicked animal from the sound of a microwave or the static of a television in a dark room. I got tunnel vision as I barreled down the hallway, the lights going out one by one behind me. Doors and cabinets flew open or slammed shut without warning, rattling my already frayed nerves. Such things only happened, of course, when I was totally alone. I was getting spray for the whiteboard in the janitorial closet when the single light bulb burst and the door slammed shut. I ran for it, knocking over mops and buckets as I went. When I slammed my body against the push bar, I couldn't be sure if the footsteps I'd heard in that cluttered room were the echoes of my own running feet, or something else closing in behind me. Last Thursday, I was driving out of the parking lot when I realized that my house keys were missing. In a huff, I reopened the outside doors of the center and mashed the elevator button for the 5th floor. I reached my classroom, letting out a sigh of relief when the lights flickered on and I saw my keys glittering on my desk. Snatching them up, I hurried out the door. The elevator. I felt my throat go dry. No one else should be in the building after hours, and if they were, I didn't want to confront them alone. I thought of heavy, dragging footsteps, but there was no movement. Even the emergency staircase was beside the elevators, so whoever it was knew I'd have to pass by eventually. What was the alternative? Spend the night in my classroom? I took a deep breath and headed out. The light of the elevator beckoned, so bright and cheerful it seemed like a trap. As I approached, though, the doors slid shut, leaving me in darkness as the elevator took its slow journey back down to the 1st floor. I patted my pockets for my phone before I realized with a sinking feeling that I'd left it in the car. Another deep breath, and I tried the push bar of the emergency stairway. It was jammed shut. I was mashing the elevator button frantically when I heard something approaching, not from in front, but from behind. The same heavy, plodding steps as before. I turned around, eyes wide, but I could see nothing in the darkness. A putrid smell filled the air. The thing in the dark came closer and closer, until, paralyzed by fear, I felt hot breath in my face. The elevator doors opened and light flooded into the hallway. I was alone. I contacted the hiring manager, the custodians, and anyone else I could think of who might be able to explain what I was experiencing, but came up with nothing. There were no urban legends about the place, no murders, disturbed burial grounds, or strange lights in the sky. Just a dull, ordinary government building where I sometimes had to be alone at night. A few minutes ago, I told my last 2 students of the day to meet me by the elevators. I was going to use the restroom, and then we'd all leave together. I took longer than expected and got engrossed in reading the graffiti in the bathroom stall. Among the usual insults, phone numbers, and political drivel was a simple message in pencil. I don't want to be alone in the dark anymore. I ran my fingers over it, frowning, and my heart sank as I heard a door open and close. My students must have gotten tired of waiting and taken the stairs out. I hurried to finish my business and leave the stall, but barely a second later the lights flickered out. I heard movement in the stall beside me. It swung open. Then those heavy footsteps dragged themselves across the bathroom floor to my own bathroom stall, stopping just in front of it. That smell, those hot wheezing breaths. I can't get a call out because of the thick walls, and data is spotty, but I think only the light from my phone is keeping whoever or whatever is out there at bay. As soon as this battery dies, I won't be alone in the dark anymore. Knock, knock, knock. I turn away from the TV, where I've been binge watching Game of Thrones, and look in the direction of the front door, startled by the unexpected interruption. I hit the mute button and listen, wondering if I had imagined it. It comes again, a soft triple knock. Someone is at the front door. I briefly wonder if maybe my parents came home early from the movies. It is their monthly date night, but I didn't hear their car pull up the driveway. Besides, they wouldn't knock on the door of their own house. Who the hell could be out there? It's the middle of the night. We live I'm alone in the house. It is the middle of the night, and some mysterious person is outside the front door. Various grisly scenarios play through my mind, culled from a dozen or so home invasion horror movies I have seen. Suddenly, I am acutely aware of just how isolated my family home is. If something happens and I need to call 911, it will take the police and ambulances a good while to respond. I arrive at the front door just as the knocking, 3 soft, evenly paced knocks just like before, comes a 4th time. "Who is it?" I call out. A moment of silence. Then a voice speaks from the other side of the door. It is a girl's voice. She sounds young, maybe my age. "Please, I need some help. There's been a car accident. My boyfriend's hurt. Please let me in. I need to use your phone." Instinctively, I reach for the deadbolt, but my hand hesitates before it makes contact. Something is wrong. Her voice is too even, too calm, almost monotone. Her tone doesn't fit with the information she has just imparted. She sounds like a bored teenager going door to door selling coupon books for a school fundraiser. I tell myself to stop being paranoid. She could just be in shock. Still, I'm reluctant to unlock the door. I creep to the window beside the front door and carefully draw back the curtain, peering outside. The vantage offered by the window gives me only a small view of the porch, but it's enough for me to make out an indistinct, shadowy figure standing in the darkness. I squint, straining my eyes, but can make out no features. I flip the switch connected to the porch light outside, but nothing happens. The bulb must be burnt out. "Please," the voice repeats. "I need some help. There's been a car accident. My boyfriend's hurt. Please let me in. I need to use your phone." The exact same phrase, in the exact same dull, emotionless tone of voice, as if she's reading from a script. My sense of unease grows. Something is not right about any of this. "Why don't you call for help on your own phone?" I ask. "Or your boyfriend's?" A pause. Then, "My boyfriend's hurt. I need to use your phone. Please let me in." My unease shifts to a nascent trickle of fear. "What's your name?" I ask. "I need some help. There's been a car accident." My fear intensifies. She sounds like a recorded message. "How about I just call 911 for you? Just tell me the location where you had your accident." "I need some help. Please let me in." "Not until you tell me your name," I answer firmly, but with a slight tremble to my voice. The doorknob suddenly rattles, turned from the other side. I jump back and it feels like my heart is trying to leap out of my chest. The doorknob rattles back and forth violently, but the door is still locked. "Hey," I shout, "stop that. Get out of here or I'll call the police." Immediately the knob stops rattling. A heavy silence descends. Moments pass and I begin to think it is over. Suddenly, thud. The door quivers in its frame as the unknown visitor slams their body against it from the other side. Thud. And again. Thud. And again. My heart is racing and my body is galvanized with sheer terror. I bolt to the coffee table where my phone lies and grab it, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The thudding at the door continues, almost rhythmically. Each impact makes my heart jump. 911, what is your emergency? The voice says on the other end of the line in a routine manner. Fighting back the panic that threatens to overwhelm me, I give the dispatcher my name and address, then tell them someone is trying to break into my house. The dispatcher tells me officers are on their way and advises me to find a place to hide sprint up the stairs to my room, slam the door, lock it, then duck into my closet and close the door. I huddle there in the dark, shaking. I can still hear the muffled, intermittent thuds at the front door below. An eternity seems to pass. Then I hear another sound off in the distance that causes relief to course through my body. Sirens, faint but getting louder as they approach. Abruptly, the thudding stops. Silence for several minutes. Then a heavy pounding at the front door that almost makes me scream. But it is not the thudding I heard before. It is the sound of someone pounding heavily at the door in an official way. An authoritative voice booms up from below, bellowing, "Is anyone in there? It's the police." I know I am safe now. "I'm coming," I yell, leaving my hiding place and exiting my room, running down the hall and scrambling downstairs. I can see flashing red and blue lights through the window. As I approach the front door, I hear a man's slightly muffled voice mutter out loud in apparent bewilderment. What the fuck is this? I don't know if he's addressing this to his partner or just thinking out loud, and I don't care either way. I have enough presence of mind to say, "Don't shoot, I'm the one who made the call," before I turn the deadbolt and open the door. My two uniformed saviors stand on the porch, one of them looking at me, the other staring down at something on the porch with an expression of disgust, both of them seeming baffled. I am so focused on the welcomed sight of the officers that at first, I don't even notice the smell or what is lying on the porch. Then it hits me, a putrid reek that sears my nostrils, a smell of rotting flesh. I look down, seeing what is lying in a heap before the front door. A badly decayed human body. It is little more than a skeleton, its bones clotted with mud and a few lingering fragments of rotted flesh. It is dressed in the tattered remains of a formal dress, and a few strands of long blonde hair still adhered to the skull. In a daze, I turn and look at the other side of the open front door. It is streaked with mud and smears of decomposed flesh. Smears that look as if they were made by a body slamming against the door. One of the police officers is saying something to me, but I don't know what. All sound seems to have faded out. I feel dizzy. I pass out. 3 days later, a pair of detectives stop by to speak with me. We sit in the living room, my parents bracketing me protectively on the couch. The detectives explain that the morning after my nighttime ordeal, a caretaker at a cemetery several miles from my house called to report a case of vandalism. A grave had been dug up, the casket broken into, and the body stolen. Police believe it had all been someone's idea of a sick practical joke, and that they had planted the body on my porch, pounded on the door, and then fled when the police had arrived. I ask the police about the body that had been disinterred. They hesitate for a moment, exchanging an uncomfortable look. They look back to me and explain that it had belonged to a local teenaged girl who had died 40 years earlier in a car accident. She had been on a date with her boyfriend on a rainy night, and they had lost control of the vehicle and crashed into a tree. They leave it at that, and I don't push them. But after they go, I do some research on my own. I find an old newspaper article about the accident online. The article explains that the boy had died instantly in the crash, but the girl had survived the impact badly wounded. She had walked more than a mile to the nearest house, apparently looking for help. This was 40 years ago, long before mobile phones, and had succumbed to her injuries on the front porch, unaware that the homeowners had been out of town on vacation. She had apparently pounded on the front door for some time in a vain bid to seek aid before dying, because her blood was smeared all over the wood. The road where the accident had taken place was the same road where my family's house stands. The only house in the area for miles. I look at the date of the accident. It was exactly 40 years to the night when I had heard the knocking. I want to let it go and put it behind me, to forget about the whole thing. Probably the police are right, and it was just the work of some local teens, or drunk college kids playing a sick, half-assed prank. But there's one thing that's still bothering me. One last thing I need to know. I borrow my parents' car and drive out to the cemetery where the girl was buried. It is only about 3 miles from where I live, not far from the site of the accident. The caretaker is a white-haired, heavy-set man in his early 60s. I tell him who I am and what happened to me the other night. He is reluctant to speak to me about it at first, but I press him until he relents. His face is troubled and there is something in his eyes, a look it takes me a moment to identify. Fear. He explains that when he found the disturbed grave, it didn't appear to have been dug up from above. There were no shovel marks in the soil. Instead, it looked as if someone, or something, had tunneled up to the surface from below. He had called the police and watched as they exhumed the casket. A large hole had been smashed through the lid. And when the police had opened the empty casket to examine the interior, he had seen something else. He just glimpsed it for a second, but a second was enough. There were scratches on the inside of the splintered lid. Scratches made by fingers. To say my father, Dennis Hargrove, was different would be like saying getting pepper sprayed was mildly unpleasant. It communicates the idea, but not nearly to the extreme that it's true. Dad was so wildly eccentric, no woman could ever put up with him. Mom left him when I was 4, never saw her again, and I'm pretty sure that's as long as any woman ever stayed with him. Years of a successful medical practice meant Dad had a lot of money, and even more land, and he wasn't a bad-looking dude, so getting women was a walk in the park. And getting them to stick around was a nightmare. Mary, the woman he was with until he died, stayed with him until the end, but I could see she hated him. She never came in the same room as him without a scowl on her face. When he finally passed after a long, arduous fight with heart disease, she vanished. She was no spring chicken herself. I had offered for her to stay in the house as long as she needed. My wife and I weren't moving in, and the only response we ever received was, "I'll not be in this house one damn second after that old bastard passes." Now that Dad's gone and the place is vacant, my wife, Jenny, and I decided to gut the old place and fix it up. It'll make a nice rental property. She and I never had any kids, so we don't need a place this big. Plus, we have no real desire to leave the city. It's a nice old home, but it was very dated. Shag carpet, spiral staircase, wood panels on the walls. It's like a Sears catalog from the 70s vomited into this place. For all of Dad's money and his constant attempts to keep up with the Joneses my whole life, he never would do anything to house that involved real work. All new appliances and furniture, but couldn't bring himself to get rid of the hideous green plastic tiles that line the shower walls. Our renovation began in the living room, working our way through the kitchen, the bathroom, and the master bedroom when Jenny noticed something weird. "Honey, have you ever noticed this wall is in farther than the wall in the bathroom? That's an exterior wall. Shouldn't they be in the same place?" "No," I replied. "I never noticed. That's how it's always been. Think the water heater is in there or something?" "No, The water heater is in that alcove next to the washer and dryer." We stood and contemplated for a minute. We weren't going to bust down the drywall on that wall. Every other wall had that stupid wood paneling but this one. But I looked at Jenny and said, what the hell?" and swung my hammer through the drywall. It gave way with no effort. So much so, I almost fell through it when my hammer didn't meet any resistance. I knocked a few more holes in the wall and stuck my head in a flashlight through the hole. "Hey, there's a staircase in here." "No way. Where does it go? I didn't know this place had a basement." "It doesn't," I replied. "At least I don't think it does." So, we knocked the rest of the drywall out until we had a hole big enough that we could both fit through. We grabbed our flashlights and headed down the staircase. "What do you think is down here, baby? Think this is where your dad stored all his gold bars? Huge wads of cash? Vintage porn collection?" Jenny said, coughing. The dust was getting stirred as we made our descent. Jenny coughed and itched as we went down. Poor girl was allergic to everything. She'd always joke about how I was never sick, and she always was. "Haha, I'm not sure, dear. I've never known this was here. I'm sure he had it sectioned off for a good reason." At the bottom of the steps was a large steel door with a padlock on it. Dad had the same lock on his chest of war relics he had in the attic, so I tried the key, and we walked into the basement that never was. It was pitch black. We shined our lights around to find a light switch, but found several candles. I used my cigarette lighter to light a few, to give us enough light to see, with tapestries and wheeled bookshelves everywhere. Tucked in one corner were several boy-sized wooden mannequins. "Tim, what is all this stuff?" "I'm not sure. Looks like an old collection of books on world religions. Mysticism, the occult, alchemy, you name it." "What was your dad doing with all of this? I thought he was Catholic." "He is, or was. I'm not really sure. Most of these books look like they haven't been touched in years. Actually, I don't think anything down here has." "Hey, look. There's a desk over here in the corner. Looks like your dad's handwriting on some of these pages." I approached the desk and fumbled around the papers. Most of them were letters from men with names I couldn't pronounce, most likely from other countries. They all dealt with Eastern mysticism, resurrection of the dead, every terrible thing you can imagine. "Tim," Jenny asked, "was your dad practicing some kind of black magic?" "I'm not sure." I thumbed through more of the papers. "Hey, here's a letter from Mom, dated 1976. You were what, 5 then?" "Yeah, that's about a year after she left." "Well, what does it say?" I glossed over the letter as quickly as I could. "She's telling Dad she loves him, but she'll never forgive him for what he's done, for creating some kind of monster." "What monster? Tim, I really think your dad was into some serious shit here if your mom left him for it." "I know, and I'm not sure. Dad was always pretty normal. I have no idea what she's talking about." We scoured the papers and the documents Dad had sitting around. I inspected the mannequins. They were all covered with runes and glyphs, no doubt related to some of the black magic Dad was studying. Jenny sat in the corner combing through papers while I continued to snoop around. "Tim, I think I have something." "What's that?" "In all your dad's letters, he seems like he's trying to knock on a very particular door. Here's one your dad translated, where some Eastern mystic talks about rescuing a soul from the afterlife, bringing it back to this dimension. Then this man from Cambodia is telling him how to bind souls to mannequins. See? And all these symbols he's put at the bottom match the ones on the mannequins. What else is in the letters?" "Well, there's one here from a chemist at Caltech, dated August 1975. There are some pretty complex chemical formulas here, and apparently some magic too. What does it make? Some kind of synthetic skin, rather real skin, that can grow and bleed without any organs. The chemist calls it the perfect disguise for someone who doesn't belong here. I don't understand. So Dad wanted to make some kind of living dead doll with skin? Given how your mother reacted, it looks like he was successful. There are even letters here from some of the people he consulted congratulating him. I thumbed through more random papers around the basement. Jenny did likewise, thumbing around through letters and envelopes Dad had strung across that corner of the room. I continued to look when I noticed Jenny had stopped moving, sitting in the corner, her eyes fixed on a single document. "Tim," she said as she began sobbing uncontrollably. "Tim, I know who—" She couldn't speak past the sobbing. I approached her. "What's wrong?" I asked. She tried to hold back the tears as she handed me the paper. I picked it up, and my heart sank when I realized what it was. Certificate of death for Timothy Wayne Hargrove, December 8th, 1974. Cause of death: brain trauma. Ever since I was little, I could always do it. The first time I remember doing it, I think I was 3. My mom literally caught me with my hand in the cookie jar. I saw her marching up, with her scary, angry mom face, and suddenly, I stopped everything. Mom stood there, still with her angry face, mid-stride and with her mouth open terrifyingly, as she'd been right in the middle of yelling something at me. Nothing moved. There was no sound other than the ringing in my ears, and I just knew I'd stopped it all. I felt it. I just sort of flexed something in my mind, and time just stops. Once I was sure I was safe, I quickly scarfed down my cookie and swallowed it up, before putting on my most innocent face and letting time resume. "You know I told you no." "I swear, Mommy, I didn't take a cookie." I licked the crumbs from my lips as covertly as I could. Mom looked confused for a second as she looked me over. "No, I'm sorry, baby. I swore I saw a cookie in your hand. What are you doing near the cookie jar? I saw your hand on the lid." So I didn't completely escape that one, but I totally minimized the damage and got to eat a free cookie. That's sort of how I used it as I grew up. I learned pretty quickly that not everyone could stop the clock like I could. I also learned that there are limits. When time is frozen, it's truly frozen. I can move about freely in a frozen world, but I can't move anything. People, objects, insects in flight, all of them are frozen in exactly the same spot as before, and no amount of force I exert can move them. I learned to be careful running around outside when I ran into a bumblebee and knocked the wind right out of myself as it completely halted my excited sprinting. The next thing I learned was to wear thick shoes. When grass can't be moved, it becomes a field of spikes. I'm pretty sure I could stab myself with it if I tried hard enough. With a thick pair of shoes, I could carefully cross over a well-manicured lawn. The more unruly ones I stayed away from. There are exceptions, sort of, like the cookie. I was holding it when I first stopped time, so I was able to carry it with me and eat. My own clothes move with me too. If I'd tried to grab another cookie, they'd have been like statues, stuck to wherever they were. Other people's clothes are like that too, so I can't go undressing people while time is frozen. Which I'm happy for in hindsight, but we'll talk about how bad I was as a teenager in a bit. For some reason, bringing objects into frozen time doesn't apply to people I'm touching. I can bring a cookie, but another person I'm touching just freezes up like everything else. I accidentally got my hand caught in the folds of my mother's skirt once because I froze time and it held me like a vice. And that's the first rule. Nothing can be moved. The second rule is, in order for time to start back up, I had to be pretty damn close to where I was when I first froze time. Otherwise, it feels like... it's hard to explain. You know those video glitches on streaming services, where it hiccups and stops for a few seconds, but then it rushes to catch up and the last few seconds of footage sort of speed by? It feels like that in my brain. Like I'm desperately trying to push forward and catch up in my brain, but I literally can't until I'm back close to where I was when I started. I suppose I could also say it was like skipping a record, but I don't know how many people would get that these days. I don't have to be in the exact same position when I was first at, thankfully, just close. My mom says I had a tendency to dash away, and that I was weirdly fast at times. So other people might slightly notice some odd visuals as I stop and start, but since I'm close to my original spot, it's nothing they can't explain. I tried to show a friend once. I told him to watch an apple I was holding. I froze time and set it on the table, then started time again. He says to him, it just looked like I'd put it down really fast. So I tried again. This time I threw the apple in the air. Once it left my hand and rose an inch, it froze like the rest of the world. My friend just saw me toss the apple in the air, so I tried one more time. I picked up the apple, froze time, and tried to set it down on the other side of the room. But then I couldn't start time again. Objects like the apple had to be close to their original position too. Thankfully, I could still pick it up. I never did find a surefire way to convince people I could freeze time. Not until I was older. Growing up with this ability, it was strange. I was a weird introvert already, and when you can stop time like a deity, you sort of develop a complex and further isolate yourself. I wasn't completely without friends, mind you. High school was hard. Puberty hit me like a freight train. Despite my parents being wonderful people who taught me about boundaries, respect, and consent, I made a conscious decision to ignore a lot of that in high school. You can think of me as an abuser, a deviant, a pervert. That's fine. I deserve it. I totally was. I consciously chose to find my way into women's spaces so I could ogle them while they were vulnerable. Locker rooms, bathrooms. My favorite was the changing rooms at the local pool. I can't open doors when time is frozen, but the showers at the pool were only covered by curtains. All I had to do was freeze time, slip in, and crawl under, and I could stare to my heart's content. For 2 years I acted like a cretin, but thought of myself as a god. At some point, it got old though. For starters, porn was way less work. For another, none of it was a real relationship, which was the other thing I desperately craved. I'd just as soon not to mention any of my deviant behavior, but the thing is, I have to. I think that was the first time I saw it. One time, I got unreasonably angry at the most popular girl in school, head of the volleyball team and queen of our high school. She was pretty, and she knew it. Lots of people hated her for it. She could be a little haughty at times, and I heard she could be really cruel to other girls, but looking back, I'm not sure where the vitriol came from. She made a harmless comment in class to something I'd suggested that wasn't really an insult, but I interpreted it as such anyway. I resolved to see her naked. In my mind, it was what she owed me for insulting me. I wanted to punish her for my own gratification. I waited till volleyball practice was over. I waited until I heard the showers running, and then I pulled open the door to the girls' locker room and froze time. I slipped inside and caught half the volleyball team in the showers. I was probably glowering like a demented little freak for a minute or two. Maybe I'd finally start to grow up, but as soon as I stood there among my classmates, I came to a realization. They didn't look like the hot naked women in porn. They weren't posing for the camera. They were scrubbing their armpits, and many of them looked nervous and scared to be showering publicly, even if it was among their teammates. They were a bunch of people just like me. Not only that, they were my classmates. The spell was broken. I just felt like a dirty intruder, and that was suddenly a lot less exciting to me. I turned to leave, hoping to pretend this never happened, and that's when I saw a shadow on the wall. To this day, I have no clue whose shadow it was. It was frozen on the wall, like everything else, but I was transfixed by it. Who was casting this shadow? Why did it look so alien? I was utterly unnerved, so I hustled out of the showers, unfroze time, and ran home, scared, and feeling very, very dirty, as I should. Somehow, I shook off my terrible teens and became a more respectful person. Trust me, perverts out there, women are so much more beautiful and sexy when they share themselves with you willingly, because you formed a connection with them. I grew up. I got a job. I have a fiancé now. It's been 10 years since I used my time-freezing ability for anything nefarious. I'm ashamed of the choices I made then. I still use the power from time to time. It's pretty handy at the few jobs I've had. It's also great for introverted nerds like me. If I need to get away, I can just freeze everything and go sit and stare at the sky for a few hours, in absolute silence. My fiancé believes that I can freeze time now, and here's how. We devised a test we could do. She wrote things onto a post-it note and placed it face down on a glass table while keeping her eyes on me sitting across the room. She'd tell me she was ready, and I would freeze time, crawl under the table, and read what she wrote. Before returning to my seat, unfreezing time and reciting what she'd written, she'd try to talk to me in other experiments, but I declined, and she respected that. I just wanted to live my life. So we did. And that brings us to now. Something has changed. About a month ago, I froze time in the middle of getting yelled at by my boss. I spent some time telling him where he could shove his citations and screaming obscenities before wandering the office for a time. I grinned when I saw I'd frozen a coworker in the midst of playing a game of solitaire when he was supposed to be working. I stopped to look out the window, staring at the frozen world outside, wrestling my anger under control, and preparing to return to my boss to let him finish his tirade. I walked past my solitaire-playing friend, and when I glanced at his computer screen, I noticed something off. It was turned off. At the time, I kind of just assumed I'd mixed up coworkers, so I sort of ignored it. When I got back to the boss's office, I swore his coffee mug was turned in a different direction. When I'd frozen time before, I could read the writing on his coffee mug. No one cares. Work harder. Yeah, He's that kind of jerk. Now, from that same position, all I saw was the black of the other side. This guy always keeps his mug face out to remind his underpaid underlings that they should be doing more for him. And also, I freaking saw the writing when I first froze this moment. Why couldn't I see it now? I couldn't move the cup or anything, so what else could I do? I resumed time and let the idiot keep yelling at me. He made sure to turn his cup to tell me to work harder as I left the office. Out of curiosity, I checked in with my solitaire friend. His computer had crashed. Poor guy lost a really important report he was working on. He had to redo it. Not sure why he was playing solitaire. I convinced myself nothing was wrong, that I just made mistakes. Someone else was playing solitaire, and I just imagined I'd seen the words on the boss's coffee cup. But things like that have been happening more frequently. Small things I could easily miss. Every time I freeze time now, I'll notice something. At home, my toothbrush will move, or a book will be askew on the shelf. I was driving myself nuts with it. I kept trying to convince myself I was just being paranoid. Nothing can move when time is frozen. Nothing but me. But last week, something happened that's never happened before. I froze time so I could wander around outside. The frozen town proper is just sort of fascinating. I was strolling along, and all of a sudden, there it was. A freaking noise. There was never any noise before. Even my own feet made no noise as I walked about with time frozen. But I heard it clear as day. Thump. It echoed out of some alley. I've never been so scared in my life. Time was frozen. I'd wandered through the statues of frozen people going about their day thousands of times. It had always been my space, my sanctuary. But now, something else was here making sounds. How could anything make a sound if time was frozen? I ran. I bruised myself on a floating mosquito as I weaved through the frozen crowds. I'd never been afraid of the frozen people before, because I knew they couldn't do anything. But now, any one of them could have made the noise. Maybe some were only pretending they were frozen. Who made that damn sound? Finally, I made it back to my original spot. I stood there panting, trying to start time back up, so I wouldn't feel so alone. But for a brief moment, I couldn't move it. I glanced around with a sense of growing dread. That's when I saw something else move around the frozen cityscape. It was only a shadow, just a flicker of some dark shape. It wasn't human. Its limbs were long, its head almost looked like an egg, and there were white empty half circles where eyes ought to be. Just white voids. It was the same shadow from the wall of the showers all those years ago. Somehow, I knew it. It wasn't frozen this time. Our eyes met. Then everything started moving and the shadow vanished. I started screaming right in the middle of the sidewalk. I refused to freeze time ever again. I hoped that whatever that thing was, I left it trapped in that frozen moment. But who the hell knows? If I freeze time again, maybe it will be in the next frozen moment waiting for me. I don't think it's safe there anymore. My sanctuary is gone, but it can't reach me here, right? Well, I'm not so sure. My fiancée is now convinced our house is haunted. She says she keeps seeing a shadow man staring at her. Her possessions keep moving. Toiletries, knickknacks, some of her clothes. I tried to tell myself it wasn't the egghead. She thought it was a stalker at first. I rolled with that and started watching out for other clues. But then she saw the white eyes. She shrieked when it happened. She said she saw them at the foot of our bed. It happened again the next evening. We spent the day distracting ourselves, then the evening brainstorming ideas. Eventually, she left to take a shower while I looked for shadow figures online. Minutes after I heard the water shut off, I heard her scream. I froze time and ran to her. By some miracle, she hadn't closed the door as she dressed herself after her shower, so I was able to run right into the room. There she was. She dropped her towel and was recoiling in terror. She stood there frozen, reeling away, about to fall backwards. I followed her gaze. There was the egghead shadow. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It stood there in the room. A living shadowy mass in a horrifically humanoid shape. Then it turned and looked at me with its empty white voids. It wasn't frozen. The next thing I knew, I couldn't move. I was as frozen as my fiancé, but I was still aware. I could only watch helplessly as its shadowy limbs shuddered to life, and it skulked towards her. It walked behind her, out of my sight. I heard it rummaging around. A minute later, I could move again. Time was still frozen. I scoured the house for that thing, but I could find no trace. What the hell had it done? I returned to the bathroom and stared helplessly at my fiancée. She was going to fall. She had slipped when she saw that thing. I moved towards where I saw the egghead, and that's where I found the pair of scissors. They sat right where the woman I loved was going to land. I tried to move them, but of course, I couldn't. I tried moving her, but I couldn't do that either. I spent hours just trying to do something to this frozen moment, so my fiancée wouldn't lose her life the second I started things up. I even tried taking off my shirt to put between her and the blade to minimize the damage, but I couldn't start time back up without my shirt. I felt so utterly helpless. With nothing else to do, I went back downstairs to restart time and sprinted up to the bedroom to aid my terrified fiancée. I already had emergency services on the way. I found her crying on the ground in an alarmingly large puddle of blood. She'd impaled her wrist on the scissors. She's in recovery now. I acted fast enough that they managed to save her. They closed the artery, and she's receiving donor blood. That thing put the scissors there. I know it. It tried to kill her. It's been 3 days since then. In that time, 3 different people have died mysteriously in our town. Bizarre accidents. 1 in a million chances that people could die in such bizarre ways, but so far, we've had 3. An older woman stumbled in such a way that she fell forward and the pence from a pencil cup went into her eye, straight through to her brain. A man stepped out of his pool and tripped over a misplaced pool float and landed on his fuse box in such a way that he'd been electrocuted. Apparently it needed servicing that nobody knew about. A teenage boy on a skateboard was thrown into the street when his board smacked into a toy on the sidewalk that nobody could identify. He'd been hit by a car. That all happened in the last 2 days. Maybe it's all a coincidence, but I don't think so. I'm not sure what this thing is, or where it came from, but it has control over time, more than I do even, and it seems to enjoy killing. I worry that I'm the one who called it here somehow. As far as I know, it's still out there. I'm going after it. I have to try and stop it. It might come back for the woman I love. It's more powerful than me, but maybe I just haven't figured out all I can do. I'm sorry, Delilah. I hope I'll be back soon. I am what you'd call a crypto addict. Before that, though, I was someone who enjoyed browsing the deep web. I wasn't really looking for anything in particular, just curious as to whether or not the stories I had heard were true. I never really found anything that creepy, though, but it was my first encounter with Bitcoin. A few sites used it, and it was the first time I'd ever heard of the cryptocurrency. As such, though, I had thought it was a scam or something shady at that point. This was back in the years 2012 to 2014, so as you can imagine, I'm really kicking myself for thinking that and not buying a few coins. My interest in the deep web waned over time, but around the year 2017, I began reading about cryptocurrency and that oh-so-shady thing Bitcoin on mainstream news outlets. That's when I made a deeper dive into the world of crypto. My goal at the beginning was to just earn enough money to pay off my student loans. Of course, nothing was ever that easy. I had made nearly every single mistake you could make while buying crypto. Once, I lost my seed phrase. I've sent crypto to the wrong wallet by mistake. I've FOMO'd and sold at a loss countless times. Twice I've been fooled by pump and dump schemes. Despite all of this, my net monetary change from buying into crypto has still been positive overall. That's mainly because I wisened up over the years and made the money back I lost, and then some. Of course, every time I hear about a random coin going up 20 times in price, I do wish I would have seen the opportunity. But I know most of those coins probably don't have much value or long-term prospects. I invest in safe projects, but of course, like almost anything else, I've been on the lookout for the next big thing. You know, the next big project that's going to the moon, so to speak. I got an email from an old acquaintance of mine. Let's call him Frank. Frank and I went back to the days when I scoured the deep web, and the two of us would often exchange information regarding anything interesting that we'd found. I hadn't got a message from him in 2 years, though, so I was kind of surprised. Hey, I know it's been a while, but I saw this weird thing and I think you'd want to check it out. I see from your profile that you've been in the crypto space for a while, right? What do you think about this? It's a site claiming to have made a new kind of coin. There was a link to a website. At first, I was really confused. This website was on the deep web, but according to this mail was regarding a new crypto coin. That made no sense. When you made a new coin, one of the first things you wanted to do was get as many people in on the project as possible. Making all information about your new coin exclusive to the deep web was a guarantee that it would probably never take off. Then again, maybe they were making some sort of super secure coin which the government couldn't trace, so they kept it on the down low. Regardless, I decided to check out the link. The website was honestly nothing to write home about. It was decently organized but was rather plain. It looked like a web page from 2007. This was definitely the wrong thing to do if you wanted people to be interested in what you were doing, or convincing them that you had a great new idea for something. There wasn't even too much information on the site about the coin itself, with most of it linking to a video they had made. There was a forum, but accessible only to members. Guessing there was nowhere else to go, I went ahead and clicked on the video. It showed a dark room with a desk right in the middle. Someone walked in wearing a white mask and a dark hoodie. As he spoke, his voice was distorted, so he was clearly using a filter of some sort. Greetings. Thank you for your interest in our new project, one by which we hope to revolutionize the very concept of cryptocurrency and blockchain technology. I have long since been a member of the crypto space, but I consider myself to be an environmentalist first. You must have already heard about the environmental impact that mining cryptocurrency has. Many people have spoken about that. As such, we wanted to look for a way to solve this problem. A solution quickly came to me, but it was a bit of an unorthodox one. You see, I am a man of many interests, and the occult was one of them. One thing I had always been told was that spirits, demons, what have you, they always know everything going on in the world. They don't follow the normal laws of physics either. It was at this point that I began frowning. What on earth was this? Was this guy really talking about ghosts and spirits in a crypto video? I thought that it might be possible to use this to our advantage. You see, a spirit can theoretically solve a problem in an instant. Time works different for them, and the best part is the environmental impact is nil. I was just about ready to turn this off at this point. What kept me going was a mild curiosity regarding where this guy was going. This had to be some sort of scam, right? But what was the scam? Was he going to ask for a donation first? Or was he just trying to install malware on my computer? I mean, he must have made this video for a reason, right? I just wanted to know what the scam was so I could tell Frank what it was. I searched around in many books on the occult until I came upon them. They do have a name, but not one that you can speak freely in this tongue. Suffice it to say that certain supernatural creatures are willing to help us and mine our coin for us. Now, of course, you must be thinking that such a thing isn't worth your soul. Rest assured, though, that these creatures don't want our souls, simply our bodies. I told them that in that case, they should buy us all a round of drinks first. He chuckled at his own joke. Anyway, the idea is simple. You, as a human, can rent out your body for a small portion of the day. In exchange, these creatures will mine coins for you. That's right. I managed to connect the spirit realm with the internet so that they can mine cryptocurrency for us. Right now, we are starting out with mining Bitcoin by this method to test it out, but we'll release our own project very soon. I can say though that I'm quite excited by the potential of our upcoming coin, as it will only be mined by these entities. All information would be held not only on the internet, but within the spirit realm as well. So even if every database on Earth was wiped clean, we could recover the data. For now though, we are just seeing how easy it is to mine Bitcoin using this method. If you're interested in renting out yourself, you can go ahead and sign the contract given on our site. If you're interested in simply buying some of our own coins when our new project will be released by conventional methods, please stay tuned for further updates. Thank you. The video ended at that, and I was left confused. Making this all would have taken some cash and some time, so was it really all just a hoax? How were they planning on making money out of this? With no further information available, I checked out their forums, but that was only open to people who had signed their contract for now. I took a look at this contract. It was needlessly long and annoyed me because I knew there was no way that a site like this could ever take anyone to court if the contract was violated. So what was the point? The gist of the whole thing was that you would agree to rent out your body for a time ranging from 1 to 10 hours a day. In exchange, you would get a set amount of Bitcoin per day, with it increasing depending on how long you rented yourself out. Let's say you got X amount for an hour, then you get 20 times X for 10 hours. Clearly, it was designed for people to choose the maximum amount of time possible. Frustrated, I put down my selection as 1 hour and hit accept. A message popped up. This contract will be valid for 1 year and cannot be cancelled before then. Are you sure you want to accept? I scoffed at the idea of them trying to enforce this contract and hit the accept button. A congratulatory message popped up, as well as an address to a wallet I could unlock. Disappointed, I browsed the site a bit more and saw nothing to explain what it really was. I could only chalk this all up to be a very elaborate hoax. The next day I went about my day as usual, when something odd happened as I left my driveway. I found myself in my office an instant later. If I had been paying a bit more attention at the time, I would have noticed that I had lost exactly 1 hour. But I wasn't. I had zoned out while driving to work occasionally, but not when I was entering the building. I chalked it up to me just having a long daydream though. Things didn't worry me. Not yet, at least. Something similar happened the next day, though I had some trouble noticing this as it happened when I was chilling around at home, and I just thought I'd lost track of time as the sky suddenly became a lot darker. The third day, though, it happened at work. I was in a meeting and then it was over and I was at my desk. On one hand, I was happy to be able to skip that meeting, but also I knew I was losing my mind. The MRIs all came back normal, and the doctors thought I had dissociative identity disorder, when a month later, I found myself in my house with some jewelry I had no recollection of getting. I learned the next day that one of my neighbors had been mugged, but didn't know who it was. That day, I suddenly found myself in a park with a shard of glass on my shoulder. I learned that someone had smashed another neighbor's car. Fed up with this, I installed cameras around the house to watch me. And that night, I saw myself leave the house and come back later with some cash. Cash I must have stolen. Yeah, I learned someone's house had been broken into the day after that. I finally put 2 and 2 together and went back to the website. I hadn't checked my wallet, but it had a substantial amount of Bitcoin now. Clearly, this thing hadn't been a hoax. They wouldn't be paying me if they weren't getting something out of it. Whatever entity chose to inhabit my body started out by just mimicking what I normally did. But it was clear it was getting more and more daring with the theft and vandalism it was doing. I read up that long contract again, and I saw no termination clause. I can't exactly communicate with this thing that takes control of me, and even if I could, I have a feeling that it doesn't want to leave. Forum posts on that site are of no help, as a few people seem to be in the same boat as me but have no idea what to do. The site doesn't have a customer service section, to no surprise. Based on what I've read of the contract, the entity can't hurt me or my property, or do a crime that would lead to me being arrested, or the such. But it can do crime as long as it makes sure that I'm not caught later on. Anyway, I highly doubt it wants me to be arrested. It would not have as much fun as when I'm free to roam around. In the end, though, I realized that I couldn't live like this. There was nothing else to do but wait for my contract to expire, so I've moved to a very remote area where there are few people around. I'm glad for that, so that the thing can't harm anyone else. I've even had to give my dog away to my parents for the time being. I don't know if she'd count as my property, but I don't want that thing hurting her one day. I read on a forum post on that site of someone who found themselves with blood on their hands after a blackout, and that they were freaking out while wondering whose it was. It's obviously much worse for those who rented out their bodies for several hours. I guess I should be thankful I only agreed to an hour. I've quit my job and I only go out to town to get supplies when the hour is up. I thought about maybe tying myself up so I can't get out, but I'd still need to do things like go to the bathroom, and that sounds like a terrible way to live. It's been 3 months total and there are 9 left. The coins I keep getting are enough to pay my living expenses, thankfully. I might have had to rent myself out for longer if that wasn't the case. I'm writing this because I was curious if there's a lawyer among you who might be willing to read over the contract I agreed to. If every contract has a loophole, I'd be happy if you could find one in this one. I can't go to a regular attorney, of course, given no one would believe me. I mean, where would I even go to dispute this? But if there's someone among you who is experienced with dealing with supernatural contracts, please do contact me. If possible, I would also prefer it if you could accept payments in Bitcoin.